So we're starting the recording now. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to 98 Words of Nothing, and I'm here again with my co-host Rosa.
Hi, everybody. Rosa again here.
And
And
today,
go on.
God, we're already screwing up. And
It's all
today we're doing a topic that I let her choose last week. And would you like to tell them what topic that was?
yes. The topic I wanted to bring up today was technology, and specifically computer and internet technology, and how it affects spirituality, but also I think maybe how we can talk about it in relation to technology, and even um, those strains of thought that go into some techno mysticism, although that's a little editorial on my part, maybe.
Right. I suck at technology. I just suck at it. And I often joke with myself saying this is going to drive me to becoming an Anprim because everything I deal with in technology, whether it be computers and stuff, it's all fucking Greek to me. I don't know what the fuck is they're saying half the time, and I was really curious because I never really thought of technology and spirituality in the same lens, or how they're similar and all that. So I feel like this is gonna be more of a Hugh episode this time, where you talk the most, and I can probably add in what I think, but I feel like this is something that you probably have more knowledge than I do, or I'm probably thinking way too deep on this.
Well, it's all right. I just wanted to keep it nice and open and light, and like maybe I want to contribute a lot of my own stuff, but I don't want to like leave you hanging either. In my own case, I was raised on technology, absolutely, and I would say I'm good with it. Like, I understand it very well on a technical level. Maybe not well enough to be an IT specialist of any kind, but I could find my way around a computer system okay.
Right.
And the other thing that I've very unfortunately noticed about the nature of computer technology these days is that it's an absolute attention suck and time suck because of its control by, of course, a monopolistic large capital. And this is, I would say, an inevitable consequence. There was never not going to be a corporatized internet, unless, of course, um, we could envision some future uh, different kind of one. Ultimately, all of our attention is being bid for every single day by very powerful, boards of directors and shareholders and all these things. And it's not in their interest to push any particular ideology. It's not in their interest to push any particular mode of thought or even to tell us that this is good for us. It's only in their interest to monopolize our time so that they can maximize profit, of course.
Right.
And so the ironic thing about that is here I am talking about the monopolization of time while talking to you on a voice chat in an application that sucks so much of my time and has done, and probably some significant amount of your time, the Discord chat application. It's an absolute sponge, and our brains go to it very easily. I've noticed the same thing with Instagram very easily and almost thoughtlessly and almost ritualistically in a way that I would compare because of its ritualism, because of its symbolic nature, and because also of its connection with high echelons of material power, to uh, to like temple economies, even
Right.
economies of attention based on economies of ritualized behavior and attention. You kind of get what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah. Um, when we look back at Bronze Age civilization, and when we look back at Mycenaean temple culture, and Egyptian temple culture, and Mesopotamian temple culture, we'll notice that these were ways of using ritualized behavior in a mass way among the people to inspire sometimes patriotism, right? Sometimes animosity, sometimes, um, but none of these things exclusively, of course, because the function of the system itself is just uh, ritualization of behavior and of attention. Get it?
Yes.
Uh, I would say that, and you've probably noticed, um, I'm a big fan of the anime series Serial Experiments Lane.
I never
You?
heard of that before.
You haven't? Oh
No.
well, apparently it's pretty popular. As a cult classic, something of a cult classic. I think it was 1996 it came out, and in 1996 it was able to absolutely and maybe with some scary accuracy predict the monopolization of time and attention that exists in the modern information age.
Right.
And in this anime, Serial Experiments Lane, the main character finds herself at a nexus between the real world and the wired, which is a kind of virtualized world entirely made up of the communications and thoughts of the people, not just in the internet, but also over radio waves, telephone lines, really anything in the air, immaterial. And she finds that she is at the nexus of an experiment to break that illusion, making it as though those two worlds are one and the same. You see?
Yes.
This is a theme that's been explored in anime probably a billion times anyway, let alone Western animation and film and books. It's very common. I would say the particular way that Lane expresses it is because of it's this kind of lonely autistic shut-in high school girl who identifies more and more with the computer and with the wired as a mode of escape and as a mode of affecting the world, not just the virtual world but the real world, in a way that relatively for an autistic high school girl isn't that immediately accessible. Um, yeah, so that's probably why I identified so strongly with that character when I was coming of age, and also probably why a whole lot of people growing up in a technological society with the boundary between this and that becoming so thin did the same. I'm sure I'm sure I'm not even the only, like the first person in our immediate circle to have used a lane profile picture. I think somebody's done this before. I'm almost certain of it. I'm going to look in our server.
We don't have a
Um,
lot of people in this server.
that's true, that's true. But like in the circle of people that you and I know, I mean,
Yeah, I'm like looking up at common friends and all that.
oh yes. And what I would say in reflection of all this is, uh, in order to detach ourselves, well, maybe not detach ourselves, in order for us to move around in this new world where it's clear that the boundary between information and reality, and we can still, and I'll tell you something, this doesn't conflict with materialism, I think, because ultimately we are still conscious of all the material things. We are just conscious also of a superimposed fact, which is the way in which the virtual is constantly intruding on it, and the way in which it always seems to create the image or the reduplication of the image or the image of the image, um, and that in this way it monopolizes our time and our attention and also our ritualized behavior. Um, I think that to this end, we need to be more conscious of how we make use of technology, for one thing. But also, we need to be more conscious of, how do I put this? The way in which it affects our relation to others. Whether our relation to others is primarily embodied in the virtual or real, and the degree to which we can dissimulate those two things.
Right.
Um, Catch me if I'm not making a whole lot of sense, of course, but
Like I said, I'm terrible when it comes to understanding technology and all that. Um, like for instance, I kind of grew up in a generation where it's transitioning. I don't know if I'm older than you or not, and probably am. Um, we basically grew up a time where iPhones were getting big when I was in middle school, basically, and it's so different from the way my sister grew up, because she was born much later, and um, their
I
relationship
could
to
just tell
technology.
you, I was born in the millennium year. How about yourself?
I was born in the 20th century.
You were born in the 20th century. Fantastic.
Yes, I mean the 98 is there for a reason.
Yes. So
So
we're not too far off, you and I. I think the main difference between you and I is not time. I think the main difference is that my mother went to Seneca for computer information technology in the 80s and 90s, or no, in the 90s, and that's kind of why. You know? Like, ultimately, I was just a little bit more in the pool, but the age difference isn't all that much, see?
right, and I right. I don't know. Like I said, I guess I never really had that much of a relationship with technology other than, say, a couple of game systems. I would get on the computer every now and again, and any handheld systems that I had, such as the Game Boy or the DS. I never really thought deeply about my connection with technology. The only thing I would ever use it for was to watch videos I considered funny, watching this old show that I liked called Code Lyoko, which actually does a lot with technology, ironically. But I never really saw it in a more spiritual sense, and not even today. So when I see people, usually boomers, complain about people being distracted by technology, I always think about, oh, it's just alienation, or it's a double edged sword. It has helped us increase our communication across the world. I mean, we wouldn't be talking now because you live in Canada and I live in America, and even then, we're not even that close because I live so far down south from where you are
Yeah.
that uh that it's been helpful to talk to other people from different cultures, different backgrounds to expand it a bit, which usually for people like me to have this experience, normally people like me would have to be either lucky to be born in, say, like a very populous city with different cultures, say like New York. And Memphis has a lot of different cultural backgrounds. We do have certain like African communities, certain Chinese communities, Chicano communities, all that. But like if you really wanted to get the experience, you would have to go to university or at least to the community college, where you would get lucky and meet someone from another country or another state, and like that would be your how far your exposure went. Today, it's so different that you can be exposed to someone across the globe with just the touch of a finger or a click of the mouse. And the alienation aspect of why we're so obsessed with this is because we are either obsessed with how we perceive ourselves or just wanting to find someone with the same interest that wasn't so easy back then. One of the people I watched, Signified B-Sides, mentioned how when he was growing up in Atlanta, he couldn't really express his nerdy self because that wasn't cool, especially within black culture. that today it's more normalized to say like anime, like comic books and shit with black youth in high school and shit because of the internet, for example. And these things getting popular because the people of his generation are becoming more open about it, so it makes it easier for us. Um, that's kind of one of the benefits of technology, but it can be, again, a double edged sword if you begin to be too obsessed with it and it becomes a distraction from your everyday life. It can be not only like a spiritual inhibition, but a social inhibition, mental inhibition, because you're no longer associating with the outside world, and the way you view reality is becomes skewed. And I sometimes watch these people online, whether they be quote unquote normies or just, radical political people that even I think is like odd in the way they act. It's like normal people don't do this. Like if I go outside, normal people don't talk like this. People don't act this strange. And some of the strangeness is, I think, welcome, but some of it is really, I see, harmful. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
so I hate to bring it to the political side real quickly, but I remember just, I like to watch Hasanabe. Whatever your opinions of him doesn't matter. And he was reviewing, Kanye's interview with not Alex Jones, but that Vice founder, the Canadian Gavin McInnes.
Oh
And
yeah.
he said, Gavin's racist and all that. He's a Nazi. And he says, when you go to Japan, we don't shame them for that. He says, oh, cool, you conquered the Ainu. Thank you for doing that. And he's saying that for an example. And I'm like, dude, why are you saying that? You don't go to Japan and say that. No one talks like that to them. Like, no one says that. And it becomes clear that, because of the circles he's around, that he was exposed to online, that they think that's probably normal. When in reality, no one outside of his community or even people that do think like him would even dare think of going to Japan and saying that. That's awkward. No one brings that
Oh
up. And
yeah.
it's just I can see why some people of the older generation are indeed frightful, but it's just fuck, I don't know, man.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna bring it back to the Bronze Age again because I'm crazy about that shit, you know? It's really interesting because you're talking about the way in which technology has so expanded our ability to communicate across cultures, not just to go places and then to be part of cultures, but also to be accessing them from anywhere. Um, and indeed, in the Bronze Age, with the perpetuation of cults of gods and goddesses that spread beyond their home cities and created a uniformity of worship, or maybe not even uniformity of worship, but a commonality of worship, where people living in what is today Iran would be able to, on some level, recognize the ritualistic and religious ideas of the people who are living today in, like, Crete. And, you know, not because they've ever met each other, not even because they have any form of direct communication, but because they are participating in a common cultural milieu which makes it possible, right?
Right,
And I
because they
think
have
maybe
some.
that's what the internet is, kind of like on a highly accelerated way, where it creates cultures which themselves are kind of groundless. They might have an origin or a particular genealogy or history which trace them back to a place in the world or a person. But this is entirely irrelevant, since, after all, it moves, it spreads, and it achieves a life of its own. And then, the people on the opposite ends of the world can achieve these unbelievable mimetic ways of communicating with each other, which of course you would never encounter. You would never encounter in normal conversation. And you would never maybe even suspect that some of these people that you engage in normal conversation with might be having those same fucking crackhead conversations on the internet at the same time. Who even knows? That's the real thing with the internet, is that we could all be equally participating in the madness, and then we could all wake up and go outside and have a normal conversation with our neighbor and not even notice. I told my neighbor how heavy the snow was shoveling, because of course there's nothing else the fuck to talk about when you're standing on a Canadian driveway. Um, how heavy the snow is shoveling. Yeah, but what am I going to tell them about? I'm going to tell them about my fears of the Third World War? Probably not. So there you go.
Right. And yeah, like I am like that as well, as you can tell. Like, except I'm usually more open IRL. I don't talk about stuff that is really, really off the wall, but I will talk about some off the wall stuff if I know that
Oh,
person well. And I think, and I know you mean you too, but like I will do that to a stranger if I find it to be beneficial of understanding, depending on the subject. So I was more open with my contemporary philosophy teacher with my politics because of the subject matter at hand. Even with
okay.
my other African history teacher, because he was so blatantly a leftist. I was more open to him because, well, we could have those conversations. Even with people that aren't really of the same ilk of me, it's always fun to bring that up. But I always have to remember that I can't act a certain way that I act online, and it's usually a little harder because having autism isn't really that great. And I think part of that is it reminds me of like the mask. It's like I think it comes from Japan. I could be totally wrong. It could be something that all cultures have. The idea of the mask is a mask that you have that you put on outside in public, the mask you have on inside at home, and the third mask is your true self. Because even then, you're not really open with your family. Like I don't talk to my family about. I haven't told them how I done mushrooms or LSD. They know I smoked pot, but they don't know I did mushrooms or LSD. Um,
Um,
So I guess it goes back to that and how technology has really helped amplified a certain view of how people should act and really lets people be who they are if they remain anonymous. So and again, it's also a double-edged sword because we've known people, you and I, who cannot be open with themselves or else they would be thrown out or even killed because of the culture they live in or the area they live in.
yeah, absolutely.
And it was eye opening, really. It made me feel more empathy and more critical of those people from those same areas that try to pretend to have pride and, like, oh, we don't have this. And I look at them with disgust because they do, and it harms that they're, like, suppressing it. So, what I'm thinking is that there is a beneficial of being your real self anonymous online, but there's also a
Mm.
negative aspect because sometimes people are, well, trolls, and they will say some of the most disgusting, abhorrent things just for attention or shock value.
Oh,
And we kind of live in a time that's post irony to the point where they could be actually serious, and we have to be careful with that. And it
mm-hmm.
just makes it more egregious. So, um, I don't know where I stand with the whole technology and spirituality aspect of things. Like it had that is another thing. I wouldn't have learned half the spiritual stuff today without technology like I would have 20 years ago back in the 2000s. I could have, but would have been to a greater degree of say like actually talking to people um online and voice chat and all that.
Oh,
Like
absolutely.
like
Like, I
I
mean, I could go and wander in old bookshops. I've done this a lot, by the way. I've gone and explored at probably every used bookstore in this city. And I'll tell you that it is very enlightening and it is very helpful, but it also is full of a whole lot of fucking Deepak Chopra. And there's like you're gonna have to sift through a lot of shit to find anything of use. And I assume that most people spend most of their lives sifting through shit before the internet because the internet makes it so easy to cut through. You get what I mean?
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
without the internet, I might have joined a Hare Krishna group or ISKCON, and it weren't for the fact that I
Yeah.
know Hindus online who are very critical of ISKCON and says, yeah, no, don't join that. Like the school it's associated with, Gravna Vaishnavism is all right, but the Parabuddha was not a good man, and his teachings are very fraudulent. For those of you who don't know, ISKCON was the group that the Silent Beetle George Harrison joined, and like that's probably how they get more people because we have people like George Harrison, Russell Brand joining, but that's beside the point.
Of course.
But yeah, I would have never known as much as Yoruba religion if it weren't for technology and all that. So it can be helpful in the spiritual path, but there's also an aspect of that spiritual materialism, and I'm using spiritual materialism in a different sense here because I do think spiritual stuff is material, but what I mean by spiritual materialism is the sense of being too attached to items that are impermanent, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah.
More of a capitalist aspect of materialism, not like the materialism of, say, like the philosophy of it, but more of the consumerism aspect. Um,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Rather, the accumulation of commodities, the immense accumulation of commodities, right?
right. And so what I was gonna say was the spiritual materialism of this aspect of online is you will also see a lot of frauds and people taking advantage of the spirituality and are basically bullshitting their way through it and are just repeating the same stuff that isn't really based in any real tradition or I guess proper philosophical background. I see this a lot on Reddit because I follow this spiritual subreddit and it's really fucking boring and just uninteresting because not only is it just like your typical Western stuff, but it's just basically nothing of deeper background. They all do alchemy. It's just circle jerking at that point, really. It's just a form of spiritual materialism. Not really, I don't see as a guide, to be honest. Not, from what I've seen, it's just stuff that is just uninteresting, and I don't even know why I still follow it.
Oh,
But
for sure.
it's just something to be aware of. Hence, I guess why I don't really think of technology and spirituality together because I just don't really ever. I guess I just didn't even think of it before. Because what was there to think of it? It's just stuff that we use every day that's keep on changing because well, this is how we are, and um, spiritual stuff is stuff for like private instances and all that.
Yep. I think that on the subject of spirituality and technology, the thing is, if you look at historically speaking, the change of technology has absolutely changed the way we experience spirituality. The shift from stone to bronze uh, meant the shift from forms of worship that were appropriate to Stone Age societies to forms of worship that were appropriate to Bronze Age ones. The same could be said of Iron Age ones. Um, it could probably be said that Christianity and Islam are some of the, nec plus ultra of Iron Age religions in some sense, because they've cut through a lot of the very Bronze Age ritualism which they themselves grew out of and which themselves carry a lot of the heritage of. Um, and that even in the modern day they're still grappling with and even then trying to grapple with the rise of technology in a different way, information technology. Um, Weber talked about the connection between the rise of capitalism and the rise of Calvinism, and you could talk about how Calvinism might have suited bourgeois merchant in Netherlands or in England better than, say, Lutheranism would have suited an absolutist prince or a peasant living in Prussia, or that Catholicism would suit an Italian landlord. These things are all very much tied up. You can't have the one without the other. And when you have big technological changes, these will result in changes very significantly in the way people think and behave. Um, and I absolutely think, even, that the rise of information technology could result in some new religious wave comparable to the way that Christianity was a wave over the Roman Empire, or in the way that Islam was a wave over the Arab world and the African world, and so on. And that something something when it comes to the internet, like if you have you ever read the series of books Dune by What's his name? Herbert something?
No, but I heard it's really good.
Oh yes, it's very good. It's also incredibly fucking confusing and dense, and a real pain in the ass to read. I'll tell you something about the Dune series. The Dune is set in a far future. It's science fiction, but there's no artificial intelligence. Why? Because there was a jihad waged against artificial intelligence at some point in the distant past of this world. Yeah? And that all advanced calculation in this world are now done by incredibly intelligent human beings who use psychotropic drugs to accelerate their brains. Uh, yeah. And all of this is not just a consequence of the advance of technology. It's also a consequence of the advance of human spirituality and the way in which this affected people to behave, and the way in which this led people to wage like a literal jihad. Yeah. And the writer of Dune at the time was very interested in the Arab revolts and in the what was going on in the 1970s in the Middle East that he was studying as he was writing. It all very connects together. Um, yeah, if you ever want to get around to reading Dune, I would definitely recommend it. Take your time. It's a little bit like reading Capital. You might even want to take notes. But it's a real slog. It's a real pain in the ass, and it's absolutely worth it. So there you go.
Yeah, I think I'm good on that. I don't, I don't, I don't know if I want to. Like, I've read stuff like the Poetic Edda. I've read stuff like what's the other book? Well, I can't really compare to the other two books because those were actually completely simple. But I've read like The Hobbit and all that. I think I'm fine with confusing or just like really phantasmic books. I could probably just
Oh
try
yeah,
to get an audio book of it instead.
that might help. Uh, That was an egg.
Are you cooking?
Oh yeah, I'm just having lunch. I hope I won't make too much noise. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Like, I just realized, so my mic didn't work, and so I had to. There's gonna be some instances in the recording where you have. It sounds like there's two of you talking, but I managed to catch it in time to where I just have to mute myself at some instances, so it's fine. For some reason, my
Yeah.
Blue Yeti isn't working on OBS right now, and I don't know why, but that's besides the point. If there's anything else you want to bring up, because like again, I really don't have much knowledge on this topic because I suck at technology in every facet. But I guess that's part of me just thinking of technology as in the contemporary circumstances of say like computers, TV, game systems, and not so much so such as tools that we use and boats and all that because Yoruba tradition does have a lot of technology stories mainly related to Ogun, who was the Orisha of iron. And iron was very important to all West African peoples because that was where we could that's how we used to build our tools because iron was so rich in Africa. We
Mm.
would use that for tools and buildings and all that, and how to advance our civilizations and do trade. Because bronze was very valuable in, say, like the old Jena Jano, which was in Mali. If you had bronze earrings, that was a status of wealth that you were very well respected. But yeah, I guess technology also has like terms of status or where you are in society is a reflection of that because usually rich people have the good stuff and the poor people don't, and it's always been like that. And then you have like churches and stuff, which I do think needs to be taxed, but I don't know. Like I said, I was not prepared for this subject.
No worries. I think I've carried through pretty well.
Yeah, we're 35 minutes in, by the way. I think this is like a good place to end it here for today. I gotta edit this out. This might be like a not 35, but at least 33-minute video, which shouldn't be too bad. Um,
Fantastic.
and I
You
guess
know, I think we covered a lot of good ground too in only half an hour too.
right. I'm trying to think. What would I like to cover today? Perhaps we don't have to do like what we're gonna cover next week. Probably should be like a surprise and shit. I might send you a DM to think what we're gonna cover, but for now I have nothing. But
Oh,
I
I will just add a couple of little things. Um, it is Friday, 16th December. When the sun sets, it'll be Shabbos, and then on Sunday, it's going to start Hanukkah, and then the entire week will be Hanukkah, and it'll end actually. The last day will be on Christmas Day,
I guess we just
and
found out
that's
what we're gonna
another.
talk. No, I guess we found out what we're gonna talk about next week. We can talk about Hanukkah.
Maybe so. That's just kind of what I'm thinking. On Sunday next week, I believe, I'm going to have a Chinese Hanukkah. Do you know what a Chinese Hanukkah is?
Is that is that when you go out to eat Chinese food because they also don't celebrate Christmas?
You got it. Chinese Hanukkah is a fantastic situation where Hanukkah happens to line up with Christmas, such that you can do the traditional Jewish thing of ordering Chinese food on Christmas and uh, celebrate Hanukkah at the same time. So it's like celebrating Hanukkah in China for Christmas.
Right.
Get it?
Yeah. But
Yeah.
like I said, I'll give you some ideas, probably a list we could go through. But I would really like to talk about Hanukkah next time because there's still a lot of things that even I don't know about, or it can be like a one of many things we talk about. Like we could just talk about like the standard holidays of winter and talk about that, and Hanukkah can be one of the things that we talk about.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I guess I would like to get this under 40 minutes. So I guess this will be it for today. Thank you, Rosa, for coming by and talking to us. This has been 98 Words of Nothing. Wishing you happy holidays and a happy new year. Signing off. Goodbye.